Oh, hi there! If you watched my last vlog, you would remember that I was talking about really struggling with my motivation when it comes to language learning, and in particular when it comes to Greek. And I think we're due for an update. I am happy to let you guys know that I seem to have overcome this crisis that I had for about a month, if not more. And now things seem to be going fine, more or less. I would say that now I have established, if not a routine, then at least a list of activities that I like doing and that I do pretty much every single day, for the most part at least. And I don't really feel like I'm struggling with my motivation or my Greek. So what have I been doing lately? At first, my goal was to kind of establish what a bare minimum would look like for me and to just stick to that in order to re-establish some sort of consistency. So basically what I was doing for a couple of weeks is mostly using my textbook, and I think that's what you basically saw in that last video. But after I started feeling like my consistency was back and I was studying more or less regularly again, I decided to challenge myself by doing some things that were pretty hard for me, but at the same time that gave me more gratification than just studying with my textbook. I started trying to read every single day, and the texts that I chose were not the best, not ideal for a beginner. I was reading the Labors of Heracles, but the version that I was reading was written for, I think, third graders or something like that. Still not the easiest and not the most relevant vocabulary, but somehow it was motivating to me because it felt like I was making progress. And after I was done with that, I also started reading this little book that I recently found at a thrift store, What Are the Chances? This book was published in the US, I believe, in 1977, and it was written for diaspora kids. So I would say that the target audience of this book is like 8-year-olds, and I actually find that the level is perfect for me. Another thing that I think has helped me to feel a little less frustrated with my Greek was the fact that I started working on this secret language project. Basically, the idea behind it was to introduce another language alongside Greek that would be less challenging than Greek. So this way I would have Greek that is really difficult for me, the progress is really slow, and then I could have this other language that was kind of like a comfort language that I could turn to when I felt the most frustrated with my Greek. And interestingly, this seems to have helped. And the reason why I'm not telling you what language it is exactly is because I still don't know if this was just a temporary measure to help me feel less down about my Greek, or if that's actually something that I want to continue. So I'm giving myself a couple more weeks to see what I potentially would want to do with this language, and after I make up my mind, I will tell you guys what language it was. But believe it or not, this was actually not the topic of today's video. Today, I wanted to talk about something different. So basically this week, I started attending a drawing class at a local arts center. And drawing is something that I've wanted to learn pretty much ever since I was a kid. And I have tried taken some classes online on my own, but I feel like I can really benefit from the accountability of offline classes, and that's what I'm trying to do. But signing up for the course and having my first class kind of made me think about learning languages as a hobby, but also the relationship between language learning and other hobbies that I have. I've always been the kind of person who is very interested in many different things and areas and activities, but who at the same time kind of feels paralyzed by the fear of starting something new and being bad at it. And so I end up doing very few of those things that I'm interested in, either because I feel very uncomfortable being a beginner at something, or maybe also because there's just so many different things that I don't really know where to start, and I feel like it would be impossible to try to divide my time between all of those different activities. But with language learning, I feel like at some point I became so comfortable with it, and even this beginner stage that obviously sucks, I hate it, but to me still being a beginner in a language is less frustrating than being a beginner in anything else. So every time I would want to just switch things up, get some new experiences, learn something new, that something new would end up being a new language. And especially in 2022, when my mental health kind of just took a dip, I started kind of trying to fill this void with different languages. At first it was Japanese, then it was Greek, then I started Polish, and so now I'm feeling a little bit better, but I kind of have to face the consequences of the actions that I took in 2022, and that was basically having 3 beginner languages. And I don't really like the idea of it. I don't like that I put myself in this perpetual cycle of being a language learner, of someone who constantly has to have a new beginner language on her plate. And I feel like by doing that, I kind of forgot what the point of language learning was for me, which again, for me, it is consuming content. But I think because I have so many languages on my plate now, as soon as I reach a certain level, a level that's good enough for actually consuming content in that language, I immediately switch to another language that I had started before. So let's say in the beginning of this year, I was really focusing a lot on Italian, and my goal was to read a book. And then I read 2 books, and then I was like, okay, now I guess it's time to switch to Greek. But what was the whole point of me learning Italian? Was it to just read 2 books and then move on? I don't think so, because again, I don't remember if I mentioned it in my other videos. Yes, language learning can be fun, but I don't enjoy the process of learning as much as I enjoy actually being able to understand things in the language that I have learned. But the way things are right now is that I'm just like learning, and as soon as I get comfortable in one language, I'm like, okay, it's time for a new language. It's time for this new beginner language. And when am I going to actually watch things, listen to things, read things in the languages that I'm learning? In the beginning of this video, I told you guys that I am reading a book meant for 8-year-old kids. I'm 29, I'm not 8. Like, I want to be reading books that I actually enjoy. So that realization was very eye-opening to me. And even though I'm not ready to give up on any of the languages that I have already started, I don't see myself starting any new languages anytime soon. So yeah, this is what I've been thinking about. I wouldn't call this a crisis. I'm not super unhappy that I've started the languages that I've started, but I just wish I hadn't done all of this within the span of 1 year, pretty much.
Μ' αρέσει τα άμαξι σου. Θυμάσαι που παρκάραμε.
Σένα, Κατερίνα. Είσαι από την Αθήνα. Ναι. Εγώ είμαι από την
You probably cannot tell, but it's the morning of the next day and I'm starting it with some Greek. Here I'm just going through my textbook, trying to tackle what is probably one of my most hated topics of all time, alongside numbers, dates, and money. And it's telling time. I also had a meeting with my study buddy / accountability partner that morning, which I didn't film for privacy reasons, but I am working, albeit very slowly, on a video about how we are doing the whole accountability thing and how it's been super helpful to me personally. But going back to the theme of this vlog, I have been thinking more about language learning as a hobby, but also its connection to my other hobbies. And something that I've realized is that I seem to learn languages best when, instead of making language learning itself a hobby of mine, I use the language I'm learning to explore my other hobbies and interests. Let's take English as an example. Of course, I spent a lot of time studying it at school and it gave me a great foundation. I'm not going to undermine that. But my skills also started growing exponentially when I started watching shows, reading books and articles, listening to music and podcasts, and so on. Do I do that for my other languages? Yes, at least I try to. But the thing is, at that time, I wasn't really trying to use immersion as a study method and force myself to consume content in English. I was simply pursuing my interests and hobbies, which included listening to certain artists, reading about them, watching their interviews, also watching shows that I liked, reading books that interested me, because only a small portion of the content that was interesting to me was available in my mother tongue, which is Russian. So I never really viewed those activities as language learning time. It was more like I had an interest, and if I wanted to explore it further, the information that was available in Russian was not enough, so I was forced to consume more content in English. But I think as I started learning more and more languages, I kind of made language learning occupy such a big part of my life that there was almost no time for other hobbies. And even if there was, I would for the most part pursue them in English. So what am I going to do about it? I think now that I've started taking drawing classes, I want to try to use some of my languages that are not English or Russian to improve my drawing skills. I know for a fact that Korean is a great language for that because there's a bunch of Korean artists that I like and follow on Instagram. Plus, I also have a couple of books about drawing in Korean, and I even took a class from a Korean creator I like back in like 2020. But right now, I am going to start with Spanish actually, because during quarantine, when everyone seemed to be obsessed with online courses, I also fell victim of marketing and bought not one, not two, but 4 drawing courses on Creana. And if you don't know, Creana is a website kind of similar to Skillshare where you can take classes about different topics, but usually they have to do with either something creative like drawing, painting, photography, video editing, or digital marketing. And yes, I bought those courses in 2020, and now 3 years later, their time has finally come. So I tried to start one of the courses, and I actually really enjoyed watching the lectures in Spanish because the teacher is Costa Rican, and although it took me a while to get used to his accent, once I did, I was very happy with myself. And I was also trying to take notes, not so much to go back to them later, but more so to stay focused because my attention span is a tragedy, but that's a topic for another video. I have to say though that taking notes or even writing in Spanish is not really something I do a lot of, so it definitely felt a bit challenging. And the lectures that I was watching were mostly introductory, so I didn't really have to draw anything, but I'm looking forward to exploring this new skill in one of my target languages. Hi, hello you guys. So what you see behind me is my bookshelf. It doesn't only have language books, but pretty much all of the language books that I have are here. And it's not looking too bad right now, but I would like to have a little bit more order and a little bit more, I don't know, sense in how things are organized, because I've been using some of the books to film or to study, and then I would just put them back randomly and not where they belong. So this is what I'm going to do right now. I am not going to be showing you these books in detail because I have a separate video where I pretty much do that, but I think there's a couple of books that you guys haven't seen even if you watched that video, and I'm gonna show them to you because if I have an excuse to talk about books, I'm gonna do it. Now let me guys show you these Greek books that I have because I don't think I had them when I was filming my bookshelf tour. So this is pretty much just a workbook for the textbook that I'm using, which is called Communicating Greek for Beginners, and you always see it in my videos, especially in my vlogs. These 2 books, one of them is a textbook and the other one is just a workbook, but they basically just cover Greek grammar and they're super thorough. in that sense. But the problem with these books is that all of the explanations, everything comes in Greek. And to be honest, it's a little bit annoying because some of the grammar it explains, a lot of the grammar it explains actually is very basic grammar. So I imagine that by the time I'll be able to read those explanations, I probably will not need to be brushing up on basic grammar, but you never know. I also know that the publisher right now is working on an English version of this book, so I probably wouldn't recommend this one for complete beginners. But if you're not starting Greek right now, or if you're willing to wait, there's going to be an English version coming sometime in the future. These books, I have a short video here on YouTube where I kind of show them in more detail. And the thing is, I didn't buy those. The publisher was kind enough to send them to me. The publisher is called Deltos, and I'm gonna link their website down below so you can buy all of that stuff there. But also, besides like the actual paper versions, they have ebooks for all these graded readers, and I believe for some of their textbooks too. So that's also an option if you don't want to pay for shipping, or if you just want to save a little bit of money. And then another thing is that for these graded readers, they also have audio available on their website completely for free. So if your level allows you to say just listen to audio without like having to follow the text, you can just download audio to all of these books for free. So this shelf is where I keep my Italian and Polish books for the most part, and honestly I'm not trying to actively buy books for these two languages just because I think that what I have is already more than enough. But yesterday I was at a thrift store and I found this little book right here. If you're not familiar with Asimil, I never know how to pronounce it, but it's basically a French publisher that creates textbooks for a lot of different languages. I think you have the most options if you are a French speaker and you can learn other languages from French. But as you can see, this one, for example, teaches you Italian through English. And so the way these textbooks are set up is that you get one dialogue per lesson. And because this book basically teaches you through dialogues, audio is really important. I've been really curious about these books for the longest time, but the price mainly was what was stopping me. But I guess you can't really argue with $2.30. So yeah, hopefully sometime, maybe later this year, maybe next year, I'll try to use it and I'll be able to have an opinion on these textbooks, because a lot of people ask me if I've used them, and all I know is that the people who have usually really like them. But then I kind of had the same thing happen to me with the Teach Yourself textbooks. Everyone raved about them so much, and when I got the Greek one, I decided I was going to return it within like pretty much 15 minutes. So I guess we'll see about this one. I think it's time to start wrapping up this vlog, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about my takeaways or my action plan now that I've decided to try to improve my languages by exploring things or topics that are interesting to me outside of language learning. The first thing that I wrote down was to stop using English as a crutch when it comes to searching for information, when it comes to consuming content, when it comes to speaking. If I know I can speak English to someone, I will not try most of the times to use one of my other languages, because I don't speak any other language as well as I speak English. And as I said, I want to use my hobbies as a way to practice my other languages, like what I was showing you yesterday or the day before when I was watching drawing classes in Spanish. I think that's something that I want to try doing more of, taking classes in my languages and not about languages, if that makes sense. I also want to try to follow more interesting people that post on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube in my target languages, and maybe look for podcasts and things like that. I know it's definitely going to be harder for some languages, like again, Greek, can't really do much with it yet. But I also know that, let's say for other languages like Italian, I got to a good level where I understand quite a lot, but I never really branched out of like podcasts for Italian learners. Even if those were for like more advanced learners, I would still just listen to those podcasts and listen to what they chose to tell me, the topics that they chose for their podcasts, instead of actively seeking out content that was interesting to me. But when it comes to Greek, even though it's still very hard, I want to push myself a little bit more to explore content that is still challenging for me, but that is related to my interests. Because yes, reading a children's book in Greek right now is easier, but an alternative to that would not be reading a whole book on something that interests me. It can also be just a social media post, a tweet, a short podcast episode, and things like that. It doesn't have to be this one-to-one replacement where instead of reading books for kids, I just start reading books for adults. No, I can start with short form content and then just kind of go from there. And that's something that I constantly have to remind myself of. I actually have a folder on Link to which I add articles in Greek that I consider interesting, and I called it future reads or something like that because I thought I wouldn't be able to touch them until like 2025. But a couple of days ago, I actually tried reading one of the articles that I had saved, and even though I had to look up a billion words, I'm not even exaggerating, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Plus the length, it was a very short article, and the topic of the article kind of made the process quite bearable and even enjoyable at times. And finally, I also kind of want to chill a little bit on the language learning front and just maybe engage in other activities. It's kind of good to remind myself that there's life outside of language learning. With that, I'm not trying to say that if it's your main hobby or your only hobby, it's bad. If anything, I think there was a time, namely last year, when language learning for me became, if not a form of therapy, then at least a coping mechanism, and I found a lot of value in focusing on language learning most of the time. But now I feel like languages have become kind of a comfort zone for me, and I feel ready to step out of it and do some other stuff that interests me. And those, I guess, are my thoughts on the topic, but I would also love to know what you guys think. Do you have other hobbies besides language learning? If so, what are they? I'm really curious to know. And do you try to connect your other hobbies to the languages that you're learning? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye bye.